So it's all fine. We created a product entity. We created the schema, created product, listed. It all works. Sometimes during development, as your project evolves, your database also evolves. You're changing stuff, removing some of them, adding new. So in this step, we will do the scenario when we're adding a new field to the entity. So the first thing to do is create a new property inside the product entity. So let's do it together. We'll add a creation timestamp. So open the product entity. And here, let's add created at, and the type will be date time. You can see the annotation reference in Doctrine documentation. I have it somewhere in a slide. So there are some properties that you can define. You can customize the name, so on and so on. So just adding created that and maybe generate getters and setters for it. I will, for the sake of simplicity, make it public. And now, since I created a new field, I can run Doctrine schema update command to actually see the SQL that will be generated to update my database. And there is a handy option, like you can say console Doctrine schema update dump SQL. Because if you run it without options, it will offer to force or dump SQL, so you can make sure how this change looks. This is probably the only moment when you feel that you work with the SQL database, because most of the time you're dealing with the object. But here you can actually see under the hood what SQL statement will be executed in order to update your schema. So it will just add a new field. And if you say force, it will actually run and update the schema. Also, you can use constructor to set the default value. For example, this created at equals new date time. So, I just set default value. As you can see, Doctrine supports working with native PHP types. The date time is the object representation of date time in PHP, and Doctrine is able to convert the date time object into the MySQL or any database that you use timestamp, and vice versa. When it's reading the date time column, it will create a datetime object from that, so you don't have to worry about it. You just use PHP datetime and it all works.
Random side thing, how many people have used the Carbon date library? So yeah, you should Google that right now. It's a library, yeah, hands up. You guys like it? Yeah. So especially if you ever have to use any calculations, you're like, oh, I need a date, but I need to like subtract this other date from it and figure out that those are 5 days. Install Carbon. It's a PHP library. Compose install Carbon, and it gives you a Carbon object which extends date time. So you could actually pass Carbon objects in the document as well. They extend date time, so it'll handle it, but now you have these nice Carbon objects in case you need to do some more complex things.
But what is the advantage? Because datetime also supports.
It's a really nice interface. So you can
It's nicer interface. It's just nicer interface.
Yeah, for example, you can get like a new, you can say like new carbon, like new datetime object, which would be of course default to right now, and then you can say arrow last day of month, and it'll mutate the datetime internally to figure out whatever the last day of this month is. So stuff like that would be
Like a semantic API,
semantic API,
which is
That's
handy.
all possible with datetime.
I like that. That sounds good.
Is there a question, comment? Yeah.
Yeah, so when you add a new field, you have the default value of, let's say, something, and then you run the update, will it populate all the entries with that default value?
No, actually, we'll come to that. In that situation, you usually, it will not. It will not. But we will come to the step where we use Doctrine migrations. And when you use Doctrine migrations, you will be able to write custom SQL queries that will run after you update the schema. So you will be able to version your schema. And instead of running Doctrine schema update, you will generate a migration script that you run, and you can customize it. So after updating the schema, you will write the SQL query that will actually update your existing data, and you will be safe to go up and down between versions and don't lose any data or populate the way you want. You will have control over that. But we'll come to that step. Patience, please. So I just created that timestamp. Yes? Yeah, function is missing. Good point. It's slash, because this class lives in add bundle entity namespace, and the datetime lives in the root namespace, so you need to use slash or use datetime at the top in order to go to the root namespace. Yeah, I'm glad that you're not sleeping and following everything we do, which is cool. And now let's try this out. Let's tidy it up a little bit. Like, I will add a link to create a new product in here. I have a snippet somewhere. Yes. For creation. And here I can redirect to list, so it will be easier to navigate. So now, let's add a new one. And let's update our view to render creation time. So just add created at here and say create that at format, and let's say date, month, year, hour, like this. Okay, as you can see, before I added created that, there will null, so I have this weird dates rendering. And at the moment I added in the constructor of product, I get the good dates. So let's just try to code it all. And that's basically it about step 5. In step 6, we will add a new entity. You will be able to practice what you already learned, creating new entity and updating the schema. So it's kind of boring step. I hope we will go through it soon. So let's just create a category entity. We have a product, and we are creating category.php. We can borrow some code from product to speed up. I will have just name. I'll make this private. Nothing fancy, something that we already done with product. And we can again update schema as we did before. Let's try dump SQL. So, okay, I have some legacy. But for you, it should work. Yes, you can, but I skipped it for the sake of simplicity. Is to relate, to reference product and category entity in order to be able to categorize our products. So if you open the slide, you will see a link to the documentation when you can look up what kind of annotations you will able to use with Doctrine. In this particular case, we will go to the product entity and add many-to-one relation because many products are related to one category. Like we'll have several wines that relate to the white wines category and several wines that relate to the red wine category. So we need to make a relation in terms of objects. That means that each product will reference to a single category entity. And in terms of database, that means that in product table, we'll have a category ID. So, but thanks to Doctrine, we'll never worry about creating a foreign keys. Doctrine will handle that for us. We're just describing it inside the annotation. So let's go to the product entity and see how we can add this. So you can look at many-to-one, right?
What's the other relationship, by the way? There's many-to-one, one-to-many, one-to-one.
They can cheat by looking on the screen.
Yeah, that's fine. And then there's one more left. Many-to-many. If you think about it, they're all actually just many-to-one. There's only one way to do a relationship in mysql. By having a foreign key in one table that points to another table. We all understand that. So one of the things that I find is Doctrine's confusing is they're like, I want a relationship. Like, do you want a one-to-one, a one-to-many, and many-to-many? Do you want it to be bidirectional or unidirectional? Like, it's all really just many-to-one. So I always think start with many-to-one. Where do you put the annotation, or where do you put the foreign key in the database? Obviously, we all know it's going to be on the product table. It's going to be a category ID on the product table. So that's where your many-to-one goes. So I would start with many-to-one. One-to-many is total garbage. That's an optional thing. We'll talk more about that later. But many-to-one is the key thing to start with.
Yeah. So as simple as add the category and specify the target entity is the category entity. Like 4 lines of code, and you can right away go to your command line and again try to dump the SQL that will generate. So I'm missing RM because when we imported the mapping, this is the standard way of importing Doctrine RM mapping. It's always like it's a standard way, the convention, because most of the time in all open source projects and code you see most of the time it will use this alias. So it's many-to-one. And this is the SQL that is generated. So it will alter the product table by adding a category ID. By the way, you can customize this, but by default, it will lowercase the relation and add the underscore ID suffix. It will make the constraint, which is a foreign key to the category table ID field, and create an index on it. So all you need to do in order to update schema is to pass force. Sorry? Just to tweak, because in documentation, they're not using Symfony. And we are using, since we are using Symfony, and we're using this use Doctrine ORM mapping, we imported that as an ORM, so we need ORM prefix. So to get rid of it, just add this ORM slash. Okay. And after updating schema, the challenging task of updating the product creation page. So the simplest way to do this is by adding a new field, the text field, where we can specify the name of the category. So if you updated your schema, just go to create HTML and paste a new field. Let's name it category. So here we'll be specifying, but no code to handle that yet, so we'll go to the controller. And same way as we created product, we'll create a category. Don't forget to add the use statement for category in your controller. So we're instantiating the category and setting the name. Category. This will produce an error, but we'll be able to fix it. Once you finish it, Doctrine will complain. If you try to create a new product now, it will complain that it found a new entity that Doctrine don't know how to manage. And it will even suggest some solutions. So I'll wait for you to get to that point and we'll figure it out together. You should get, oops, sorry. Let's fix that name. So if you've done everything correctly, you will get this error. So now, since we made a relation, Doctrine Doctrine actually, when you say persist product and flush, he goes through all the relations of a product, and he found the category entity, but he wasn't sure what to do with it because we didn't persist category explicitly. Or there is another option to specify cascade persist in your many-to-one relation. So there are two ways to fix this issue. I think it perfectly makes sense to make category persist cascade in this case. So just go to your many-to-one and add cascade persist. So just copy it from there. And add it like this. This cascade can also have another values like cascade delete or cascade all. So you can tell Doctrine how to handle your relations. So I'm retrying. And now it's actually persisted. And now you can update the view to render the category as well. It will be as simple as category, and then here product, category, name. No kuna. That's right. So this is the way to fix the error. And after this, you should have everything in place, and the creation page should work again. These two commands. And step 7. First relation. So if you're stuck or having problems, just run these two commands from the help file and you will be ready for the next step. Okay? So Symfony provides this handy toolbar on the bottom. And when you're working with Doctrine, the most interesting thing is this part here. You can click it and see. And in this embedded mode, it shows that this page runs 2 queries in order to render the page. And if you click on it, just click on this, you will see what queries are run. You can expand them, inspect, see the useful information like time required to run the query and so on. And for this page is 2 queries. And let's notice this interesting thing. If I add a new product, like I'm adding one more wine, it will be 3. So as I'm adding the new product, it increased the numbers of queries required to run this page. And someone will say, Doctrine sucks, man. It generates additional query each time and I render the product. So this is serious kind of issues because we want to render like 20 or more products on the page, and we don't want so much queries to be generated. And as you can see, it generates additional query for each category. This one, then this one, and so on. in order to show you why this happens, I will go to the controller and dump the list of products. So it's the index action, and I'm dumping products. And here is the interesting stuff. So each product have the category inside. And as you can see, this category have this is initialized field that it's not ours, we didn't add that. And it's have only ID. And if I hover, because I use this debug component, it will see that it is not instance of my category class, but proxies CG app bundle entity category. What is that? That's the mechanism used by Doctrine. It's called the proxy objects. And the proxy objects are generated automatically by Doctrine and are stored in the cache dev Doctrine ORM proxies. So here's this magic object that makes this additional query. And as you can see, it extends our category entity to add some functionality. This functionality is called lazy loading. So how does it work? Basically, as you can see, this category entity have only ID. And if I dump products, this is the fourth one. And what happens if I say products, category, name, and dump it again? So this is the dump before I access the category name and after that. So this is my object, my category object, my product object actually, before I accessed some of category fields, and this is after it. As you can see, the difference is initialized false and is initialized true, and that I have the name field initialized. So the idea behind this is that you don't worry about fetching categories from the database explicitly, but Doctrine does that lazy for you via proxy object in the moment when you're trying to access some of the fields of your category entity. And it's handy most of the time, but in the situation when you're rendering a list of many objects which are related and accessing, it will actually, in this moment when you're accessing it, trigger the additional SQL statement inside your HTML, inside your Twig template, actually, and you don't want to do that. And now we will go through some steps to optimize this, to prefetch our categories in order to reduce the amount of queries required to render this page. So in the case when you're rendering a single product, this would probably not be a problem. But when you're rendering a list, it is kind of annoying to have many queries generated based on number of products. So I will just remove my dumps. And I will use repository to create a query that will fetch categories and products joined together. In order to do that, entity repository provides this create query builder method, which will give me the instance of Doctrine query builder, which provides a nice API for building queries. So let's go and see how it will look now. So create query builder, and now I'm working with the query builder instance, and it provides, let me just go, okay. The parameter is alias. So I will say that alias is product. And then I want to select product and category. And then I want to join product category with category. And then I say get query and get result, if I remember correctly. So basically, we explicitly told Doctrine to join these two tables in order to prevent lazy loading and fetching category data, because once we join and we say explicitly that we want to select both of them, it will know that we want category fetched from database and cached in the result set. Let me just see if this works. As you can see, number of queries is 1 now, because I joined.
The tricky thing with that is that in mysql we say select product non-category. It's like saying select product.star non-category.star. But in mysql that would actually change the result set, right? Because you'd actually be like getting everything from product and everything from category, so that all fields are both. That's not the case in Doctrine. We said select product category. It takes that first one and still gives us product objects. So what was really returned from this query before was product objects, now is still product objects. The fact that you have that comma category there second says give me product objects, but at the same time when you do the query, grab the category stuff and just put it somewhere hidden for later in case we need it. But it's not like you now get back something that has fields for product and category. It's still product objects, but there's more stuff in the background. So the cool thing about that is on day one, you can not do this and say just query for your product, and then call get category on it. And then 6 months later, when you realize that you have too many queries on the page, you can change the query to join, but it doesn't change any of your other code. Because before it was returning a product object, it's still returning a product object, but the category stuff is in the background, so now you have less queries. So it's one little confusing thing. It's still getting back product objects. If you want to not get back a product object anymore, but instead maybe individual fields, then instead of selecting from product, you would actually select product.id, product.name. So as soon as you start selecting individual fields, you get back an associative array. But if you just select product, you're going to get back that type of object.
Yeah. And things get even more tricky when you have a lot of these joins on the page. And you say, I lowered number of queries in order to render my page, but somehow your page is loads slower than before. That happened to me many times, and that's because Doctrine needs to hydrate all of your objects. And if you have like 50 products on the page and joining many attributes, relations, categories, stuff, like you have 7 or 8 joins, that means that Doctrine needs to create a lot of objects and set a lot of data on them. So this does not guarantee that you will always get page loading faster. So you need to balance between number of queries on the one side and number of objects to be hydrated on the other side. And sometimes it's smart to do what Ryan said, to just partially load data, like you specify what fields you really need on the page in order to get the best performance. But this example is useful to see how lazy loading actually works. So Doctrine tries to fetch category data if it's there in the memory, and if not, it will lazy load the data by issuing an additional SQL query. So it's pretty flexible. Do you have query working? Yep. We already use Query Builder. because we created it. We'll just add order by, I guess. Yeah. Order by, let's say, I have not many. Let me add one more. So let's order by price. Here it is. So just add order by. And you can say there if you want ascending or descending order. Yeah. Cheapest first. By adding a new action, the category action, when we will list only the products from the certain category. So go to product controller again. And just similar to index, we'll create the category action. This placeholder is actually place for the category name in the URL. So the URL will look like product / category / category name. And it will be available as parameter inside the action. So it will just map the variable from URL and pass it in the action ready to use. And it will basically be the same action as we have in the index. I will just add the where clause when I say product category dot name equals category name, and then set parameter category name category name. So as simple as that. So here we're just learning how to add where and how to bind the parameters to the query. It's similar like with the video object. The query builder is pretty handy when you need to build the dynamic queries, like queries based on the user input. So you can start building a query and then based on the input add some constraints. Let me check if it works. It will be product category red. It works. I'll back so you can see the action. Radi? Bravo. If anybody needs assistance, just raise your hand. We basically added in 2 new lines in the copying the index section and adding 2 additional lines. As you can see by looking at your controller, it does not look like it's in a very good shape. I mean, we have a lot of queries, big chunk of code inside. You can feel that it needs some diet and extract this code and move to some other place when it belongs. Because controllers usually need to be just a glue between the user input and the services that do their job. And this is the good opportunity to introduce customizing the repositories, because now we are working with generic repository that is provided by Doctrine. It lives inside the Doctrine namespaces, but you can also create a separate repository class for each entity. And that's what we need to do. We'll create a repository and then move all of these queries inside our custom repository and try out the controller's code. So if you open the slide, you'll see the instructions. First thing to do is to go to product entity and specify the repository class. It's done like this. So product entity, and just inside the entity declaration, you can specify repository class. And let's say it's product repository. And now just create this class in the same namespace. So it's product repository PHP. And it will extend the Doctrines one. So, 2 things to do. Repository class inside the product entity and create a new product repository. After doing that, you'll be ready to just copy queries from your controller and drop them right into the product repository. So let's do that. So first, the index section. I will just copy this and extract it into product repository by creating a new function. So let's call it find all products. And we will refer to this since we are now inside the product repository. And nothing else changes. It's just copy-pasted from the controller. And then in controller, I will use it like find all products. And my controller action now looks much slimmer than before. And I will do same for category action. So let's say it's so find all products by category name. And parameter will be, of course, the category name. And paste the query. Yeah, like this. And inside the controller, I will refer like this. So we're just moving things around a bit to show that you can actually create a custom repository classes. I'm there to help. Just raise your hand. How is it going? Did you manage to move all your queries from the controller to repository? If not, feel free to check out the branch so we can move to the next step, which is the DQL. Yeah, I think we will finish with DQL. So the main part of the Doctrine abstraction layer is the DQL, which is a shortcut for Doctrine query language. And Doctrine query language is similar to the SQL, and it's highly inspired by HQL, which is a Hibernate query language. Hibernate is the ORM for Java. And the idea is to abstract the query language of each individual RDBMS. Like MySQL has its own syntax, Postgre has its own syntax, and so on. So they created a language that you can write SQL-like queries to, but it can then be converted to the native query language based on the RDBMS you use. And we created some queries with Query Builder, but behind the scenes, Doctrine from these objects, because the Query Builder will return the instance of Doctrine query, Doctrine ORM query, which when you run, then compiles to the DQL, and on the Doctrine abstraction layer, database abstraction layer, it's actually converted to the native SQL. So you have like many layers of abstraction. And understanding of the DQL is pretty important, because when you understand this ORM, DQL, and native layer, you will be able to understand how Doctrine works and how to optimize, how to debug it, and so on and so on. So it's pretty important to just know how DQL works. And in order to learn and write a single DQL query for demo purpose, we will go to this find all process by category you moved to in your repository and refactor it to use the DQL. And I hope I will not make too many mistakes because, to be honest, when I need to write DQL query, I always look up the documentation. And so inside the entity repository, almost never. Yeah. Sometimes I use native SQL when, for example, when you have reports that are really heavy and you want to get most of the native database features that DQL does not abstract. You can use SQL, but of course there are some advanced stuff like defining your own DQL functions. So you can actually customize how you can influence. Doctrine allows you to define your own DQL function to extend the query itself, but it's pretty advanced topic and it's out of the scope of this workshop, so I will not bother, but it's important to know that this stuff exists as well. So, entity manager. Okay, so the method that we will use is create native queries, so it will go like this. I will get entity manager and then run create query method. And now here I will write a string that represents DQL query in order to get this working as it used to work before. So it's most of the time you will feel like writing a regular SQL query, you will see. So it goes like select product. So actually the main difference between SQL and DQL is that you're querying the entities here, the objects, not tables. So you need to say app bundle product like this. And you will say like join product category, if I remember correctly. And then say where product category, no, category name equals category name, and yeah, we will keep this set parameter. And get result. And am I missing something? Yeah. Select product. Product. Yeah. Like this. Let me check if it works. No. Okay, category name, missing parameter. Yeah, it works. And here is the query that is generated based on my DQL query. You can always look up on that. And while we are here, it's worth mentioning that Doctrine Doctrine provides a caching mechanism, and you can cache 3 different things. You have a result cache, a query cache, and a metadata cache. So the cache, the query cache is Doctrine allows you to cache transition from the DQL query to the native SQL query. And that can be handy and can save a lot of time. Also, you can cache the mapping information and, of course, the results. Unfortunately, we're running out of time and I don't have a chance to show you the caching. But in other steps, you can see basic caching and also fixtures and migrations. So at home, when you have time, if you want to play with it, you can look into it. And of course, if you have any questions or ideas, you can always ping me on Twitter or drop me an email. I will be glad to answer any questions regarding Doctrine or Symfony or whatever. And if you have now some interesting question or idea, it's time to raise your hand and ask me anything. Or if it's too long or you don't feel like sharing, catch me in the hall. Please.
All the different database implementations.
Sorry?
All the different database implementations complete? Or are there some functions that you can only use with mysql or Postgres or something like that?
Are there any other?
Any features that you cannot use abstractly?
Yes. For example, if you want to use MySQL random function, it will not work because it's not, I think it's not part of the SQL standard. So because other database management system does not support it, it's not included. But if you want to do that, you have 2 solutions. You can go for native query in that particular case, or you can define your DQL function, custom DQL function, and that there is a documentation on that both in Doctrine and Symfony documentation. Just Google custom Doctrine DQL function, and you will see it's pretty simple. It's just implementing one single interface, and it's most of the time you just tell Doctrine how to compile DQL function to the native function, and of course it will not work if you are not using MySQL or if you're using the standard DMS that does not support it. It will not work, but in your case it will work, and you will work with DQL as you would if it's natively supported.
And you'll know because you'll try to use a function. Like
It will fail.
Like select count works, but something like that, and like what's count? And then it must be something that's specific to a platform, so it's not in there. So you do what he said, or you can be like, no, screw it, I'm gonna write raw SQL in this case, just use my database specific function.
Yeah. Basically what you wanted to say, if you have tests, they will fail. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Don't be shy. Okay. Thank you all for attending. You were awesome. I'm really lucky that you managed to follow most of the time. But unfortunately, we had some problems at the beginning, so we're running out of time because it's always tough. It's the first workshop now you have set up, and on the next workshop, I think it will be faster because you will not waste a lot of time on setting up.
There is a really cool go-to site. I actually saw it. I was like, wow, that's really cool this year. But wow, it was cool last year. It's like way cooler this year. So go check that out. You can rate talks and like comment a million times. If you go to our talk. Oh yeah, if you go to our talk, you'll see that Ivo, the conference organizer, was testing the comments one day ago and has test as the first comment. So you can make fun of him for that. And then also on Camp University, which is my site, we do have a screencast on Doctrine queries, so like doing raw SQL and like selecting more specific things, doing filters, which is like where you do a query in Doctrine and it automatically adds a where clause. So if you have like tenancy and every query has to have like a where company ID equals 5 type of thing, we talk about that. So there's a coupon code up there just for you guys. So that'll be active for a couple days. So sign up for an account and they'll let you watch that. Or if you like to read, you can just read the scripts. All right, now we're going to go have lunch. So see you guys later. Thanks.